In June 1989, Kansas is rocked by a series of attacks on young women. 24-year-old Terri Maness was found murdered in her townhouse, and 11 days later, 24-year-old Joan Butler goes missing from her apartment. Just days after that, two roommates, Theresa and Christine Rusch, are abducted as well. These abductions spur a manhunt across several states as investigators search for their kidnapper in the hopes that these three women can be found alive. This is part 2 of their story.
Hi, I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Amy.
And you're listening to She Goes by Jane. At the end of this episode and every episode, we will be joined by a special guest who will read an original poem by Amy Baker about the women we're featuring. This week, we are joined by Jackie Lee McLean.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Amy.
Vanessa, last week we started talking about a series of disappearances that happened in Kansas in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
And how in June of that year, it was really like an explosion of violence against young women, starting with 24-year-old Terri Maness, who was murdered in her apartment, followed 11 days later by the disappearance of 24-year-old Joan Butler.
Yes. And today there's more.
There's more, yes. So, like a lot of the stories we've talked about in this podcast, it does take a while for Joan's disappearance to really get much traction in terms of an investigation, which we were talking about last episode.
Right. So Joan's, to kind of update, Joan's coworker, she works at a media agency.
Yep.
And her coworkers are trying to make almost like an ad campaign.
Right.
Letting people know that she's missing.
Yeah, and it successfully worked to find her car, but not Joan.
Okay.
But the police were, kind of sluggish in their response. Again, she was last seen in the early morning hours of June 18th when she left her friend's house after a night of dancing and headed back to her apartment in Overland Park. And when she didn't come to work, yes, everyone in her circle knew something was wrong. One of their initial fears had been that she was experiencing some difficulties, that she could have self-harmed herself. But on June 25th, her rental car is found over 30 miles away from her apartment complex. And that's where the police first encounter a man named R on his way to the vehicle, but he managed to escape. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you remember, when Officer Edwards bursts into the apartment at Trail Ridge Apartments in Lawrence, there are 5 men sitting on the floor eating pizza, which, you could not get past that
Quite
image.
comically, even though, like I said, this is not a funny story, but just eating pizza, and this kind of kidnapper
runs through
your apartment building.
Right.
No, not through your building, through your apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just continue eating pizza.
Right.
Yeah.
So these men, because we didn't talk about who they were last time.
Right. Who are these men who keep eating the pizza?
Well, I don't know if they kept eating the pizza, but
I don't know. They're sitting on the floor eating pizza.
that's what they had been doing. Anyway.
Okay.
They identified themselves as laborers who were working for R, which is what we're referring to this man as. And they're working at his painting company. And I said briefly in our first episode that he had started a painting business that primarily worked on apartment complexes.
Okay.
Now, these men have varying degrees of knowledge about R because he largely picked up day laborers, some of whom were on work release from prison programs and some of whom were homeless. So these laborers aren't able to say much about him, but they do say they recognize the rental car, the Corsica. They didn't know it was a rental car. They thought it was his, and that he had been driving it for at least a few days. In their recounting of information, they mentioned that R had an associate whose nickname was Frenchie. Now, of course, Frenchie has a real name, but we're just going with Frenchie because I don't want us to fixate on this person. Now, Frenchie had been working with R largely in identifying apartments that could be robbed, noting when people would be on vacation or out of town. So he would go and tell R this information.
So is this guy working with him?
They are associated with the paint business, right?
But is he also a terrible person or just moderately terrible? Is he just a robber?
Just a robber.
Just a robber?
Frenchie's not.
He's not a kidnappy murdery type?
No.
Okay.
But he does help facilitate this. So
But he knows what he's facilitating?
well, I don't think he knows about the kidnapping situation, but he does know that like, he's helping R kind of go in and take valuables when people are gone.
Okay. Different levels of criminal.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. So basically, they had been involved in a lot of shady things. And so when R calls Frenchie from a payphone asking to be picked up, I'm guessing he likely didn't think too much about it. And so Frenchie ends up picking up R not far from the Trail Ridge apartments. Those are the apartments that R had just run through and escaped the police. And R asked Frenchie to drive past the complex so that he could catch a glimpse of the police activity there. Now, R starts telling Frenchie the story of escaping cops and starts saying that had to do with accessing others' bank accounts. So he tells Frenchie that this is why he was being chased by the police. But even with this, Frenchie tells him, like, stop talking. Like, basically, it's better if you keep all of that kind of information to yourself.
So Frenchie's a smarter criminal.
Yeah, Frenchie is like, I don't want to know.
I don't want to know.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Frenchie drops R off in Lenexa, which is just south of Overland Park, where Joan had lived. R had an apartment in Lenexa. The police were getting a lot from Frenchie, but not solid information about Joan. And when asked about the car, Frenchie said that R told him that a girlfriend had rented it for him. Frenchie did say that R had let him drive the car, but he was told not to look in the glove compartment or the trunk.
Would you drive a car that somebody lent you if they told you not to look in the glove compartment or the trunk?
Well, I wouldn't, but like Frenchie was like, okay, right? And this is for good reason. So when they're searching this Chevy Corsica, investigators found that part of the trunk's matting had been removed and there were places in the trunk that tested positive for blood. And inside the glove compartment was an air pistol with pellets and CO2 cartridges. Around this time, other investigators are collecting information about R himself. They learn of his first murder, which we talked about in our first episode. This was the murder of 73-year-old Hazel. They also learn that he'd been involved in a series of crimes since, mostly financially related or car thefts. Despite all of this, they are unable to actually locate R. So all of this is happening, but while the police are looking for R over in Lenexa, two women, Theresa Brown and Christine Rusch, are planning a party for June 24th, which was Saturday night, and they were hosting it at their apartment in the Trafalgar Square apartment complex.
So we have new people and dates. So
yes,
we're heading into the two
yes,
final victims that we know of.
yes,
Alleged.
Yes.
You usually add that. I added it for you this time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So Theresa and Christine, they are roommates. At 22, Theresa was a dental assistant who was originally from the Lake of Ozarks, Missouri. In high school, she'd been a cheerleader and was the prom queen. After that, she went to Southern Missouri College, but only attended a year before dropping out and moving to Kansas City, which was actually something all of her siblings, like she's one of several. A while after she moved to Kansas City, she started dating Mike Ronning. Mike was a Johnson County Sheriff's deputy. She met Christine through a mutual friend, and the two decided to rent an apartment together at Trafalgar Square. But in the summer of 1989, Theresa had plans to move out. She wanted to become a dental hygienist and planned to live with her aunt and save some money, and to be closer to her new college. So Theresa and Christine, they click, and it's no wonder. Christine and Theresa were both 22. In fact, they shared a birthday. Like Theresa, Christine had only gone to college briefly and was working for Firestone Optics in North Kansas City. And this was owned by her father. And both of them seemed to be close with their families. So they're both young women who are working, trying to get their careers going, had the same birthday, and just were like really connected with their family members. And so this party Christine and Theresa were planning was supposed to be kind of a going away party for Theresa, essentially a way to celebrate their end of their time together as roommates. To prepare for this, both Theresa and Christine, along with a friend, picked up a keg of beer, or several kegs of beer, I think, and they posted signs around the complex announcing the party, and the party would start at 9 p.m. And it did. Apparently, it was quite crowded, and this was not surprising since they were offering free beer. And there, amongst this crowd of people, was R.
Is he from their same apartment complex?
No. Now, Theresa and Christine, they knew R because they had met him kind of at a complex gathering that was hosted to like kind of get to know each other at the complex.
Okay.
And he had done work there, which is why he was there. So while
He's significantly older than them at this point, though, right?
not too...
He was 16 in 1977. This is 1989.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do math. Okay,
Yeah.
so he's only 28 and they're 22.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. He's done like a lot in this amount of time.
Yes.
So I was thinking older, but no. Okay,
No,
so
no, he's...
So R is 28 and the girls are 22. He's at their apartment so for this party.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. And so he's been invited in because he's been doing work at this apartment complex. And that's kind of where they, get to meet each other. So Theresa, she's got the boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
So he meets Christine. He kind of fixates on her. So they meet at this party. But then also he just kind of keeps running into her around the complex.
So would we be calling this like a little crush, or do we think he's got like a full out crazy guy fixation?
Not to get too much into his psychology, but I really don't see him as a person like capable of something like a crush.
So just go straight to the crazy part.
But I also don't think necessarily crazy stalker kind of person
Okay.
at all. I think Christine was really pretty and he kind of had her kind of in his frame of target, but not in like a hyper stalkerish kind of way.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Nothing that would be totally obvious to her, probably?
No.
Okay.
So when she sees him at the party, she's not surprised.
So it wouldn't be like, oh, he has a crush on me, or, oh, like, he's going to stalk me. Like, nothing alarming or noticeable, probably.
Yeah, I don't know if she would have noticed or said anything to anyone about him. But he does show at the party, she's not alarmed by this or surprised by it. They only interact very briefly at the party. So it's kind of like a chat in passing. And then, she's off again talking to other guests. What she doesn't know is that he is assessing their apartment while he's there. On Monday morning, Christine calls the dental clinic where Theresa works and told them that Theresa wouldn't be coming in because she was sick. Then Christine calls into Firestone Optics and told the woman who answered the call, Margaret, that she was having stomach issues and wouldn't be going into work. She asked that Margaret tell her father that she was going to go to the doctor's but would be back home later. Although it was unusual for Christine to call into work either for herself or to call in for Theresa, everyone sort of took it in stride except for Theresa's sister, Joyce. Because Joyce lived near Theresa's work, Theresa almost always ate lunch at Joyce's place. So when Theresa doesn't show, Joyce calls her workplace looking for her. The person answering the phone told her that Theresa was homesick and then added that Christine had called in for her. And this was immediately alarming for Joyce. There was no way that Theresa wouldn't have let her know if she was sick, and it was out of character for Christine to call in for her. This would have meant something significant was wrong with Theresa. And so she calls Christine's workplace, and there she learns that Christine has called in sick there as well. So Joyce just starts calling their apartment, but no one ever picks up.
Okay, so the party was on Saturday?
Yes.
And this is Monday?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it does seem really weird, right?
Right.
Like to have a friend call for you?
Yeah.
Why? Are we going to know why?
No.
Oh.
I don't think we ever find out.
We never find out why.
I mean, we can put together a few things, but...
Are we going to talk about those things?
We could.
Okay.
Okay. So the next day, Joyce calls Mike, who's Theresa's boyfriend. But he said that he hadn't been able to reach her the previous day either. He even stopped by the apartment, but no one was answering the door. And so fearing something had happened, Joyce kind of rounds up her siblings and they go to the apartment kind of like in a group. Like Joan Butler's family, they were initially denied access to the apartment, but they did find her car in the parking lot. Now, at the same time, Christine's family is also starting to worry. Christine had spoken to her dad on Sunday, and she mentioned having some stomach issues, but she intended to go to her parents' house on Monday night to cook dinner from her family. Her mother had surgery the Friday before, and that was kind of her way of helping out. So obviously, when her father learned that she'd called in sick for for stomach issues, he was alarmed because this would have been 2 days that she was sick, and he couldn't get a hold of her on the phone.
Okay, so she herself had said that she was having stomach issues.
Yes, on Sunday.
On Sunday. Okay.
And then when she calls in for work,
but it's still, Monday, we're only hearing from Christine. We're not hearing from Theresa, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
So he also goes to the complex, but unlike Theresa's siblings, he can't find Christine's Dodge Colt in the parking lot, and she wasn't coming to the door of her apartment. And given that he couldn't get a hold of anyone, he did check the local hospital, fearing that something might have happened to her, but found that Christine hadn't been admitted. So back to the apartment complex he goes, and he's standing outside her door, and he notices that the area around the lock seemed to have been kind of chipped away, and it left room for him to insert a credit card in and kind of move the lock mechanism, which is what he does and breaks into their apartment. Inside, nothing seems too out of the order in the living room, but he did notice the kegs were still on the balcony, and they were supposed to have been returned by this point. In both Christine and Theresa's rooms, though, their clothing is scattered on the floor and their beds are unmade, which is not characteristic of either of them. And inside one of the bathrooms, he finds Theresa's curling iron is still on. All of this was enough to concern him, so he goes to the nearest police station. Now, Theresa's family, they're also on the same path. And so basically the two families end up filing missing persons reports around the same time. And while Joan's case was handled rather sluggishly at first, this wasn't the case with Theresa and Christine. The fact that both families were coming in independently, that the women were billed as responsible with no stressful life situations happening at the time, and the fact there was already an active missing persons case for Joan really sends them into action. Their initial search of the apartment does provide little cause for concern. There's no signs of foul play or forced entry, and that at this point they know about R, there's nothing clearly to indicate that he had been there. Earlier, though, when they spoke to Frenchie, the investigators had asked him about where they had their painting contracts, and Frenchie had specifically mentioned this complex, Trafalgar Square, on his list. So this was like too much of a coincidence for them.
So are they still like looking into R as a possibility for Joan at this point? Is that why they're asking?
Yes.
Okay, so they're just monitoring him, and like Frenchie happens to be someone close to him?
Well, so at this point, they've gotten some information from Frenchie in their initial search for Joan. And he just is kind of mentioning the apartment complexes that they've had contracts with. Mm-hmm. And so when two women go missing from one of those, it's just too much, right?
Okay.
So they know that something serious has likely happened. So they're reacting a lot faster. They bring Frenchie in again for questioning, and he's really reluctant, although he does eventually say that Frenchie, had been in Theresa and Christine's apartment with R. He said they'd been asked to check for water damage, and while they were in there, R went through their personal things, like their underwear drawers. And while questioning Frenchie, they also learned that R had been purposefully placing himself in Christine's path. So at this point, it's very clear that the Kansas City and surrounding areas that something has happened to all three women and that R is connected between them all. While Christine's Dodge Colt is still missing, they had found R's Toyota in Grandview, Missouri at another complex. What investigators would later learn is that he attempted to enter another woman's apartment at this complex but was unsuccessful when he was interrupted by the maintenance man at this complex. And so the maintenance man, was worried for her safety and basically found the woman and told her that there was a prowler around asking about her.
So he saved this woman from being part of this story.
Yes.
Like in a bad way.
Yeah, and so the maintenance man knows nothing about this situation because he hasn't been watching the news, but he was just creeped out by this guy. And so he tells this woman, and she realizes who it is, like as he's describing him. And she says she had seen the news reports about R, so she calls the police immediately. And so when the police arrive, they were able to find R's Toyota in the parking lot.
Okay.
And inside the car, they found a large collection of keys, likely the ones he'd obtained during his work in apartment complexes as a painter and was using to enter apartments. So that's why there's often not...
It's like too convenient of a job for this guy.
Yes. Yeah. And they also found a number of fake IDs with various aliases, and they found bank cards belonging to both Theresa and Christine.
So he
Well, so this is like a major clue for them. Their credit cards are in his car.
Yeah.
And there's also some jewelry in the glove box. What they also find on his car, though, is incredibly important. On his car is a stolen plate. And this is the one that was reported missing from Wichita the same night that Terri Maness was murdered, which we talked about in our first episode.
Right.
And you were like, does this matter?
It matters.
It matters, yeah.
Okay.
So this is the first time that there's clear evidence that he might be tied to her murder as well. So like the things are clicking together.
Yeah.
So during this investigation, a few things are found, but I'm going to run through the sort of order of things now because we have a lot of dates and a lot of things going on. So to review about these disappearances, we have Joan going missing on the 18th around 4 a.m. And about 2 hours later at 6 a.m., her bank card is used to withdraw $300 from her account at Capital Federal Savings. The next day, June 19th at 2:15 a.m., her card was used again to withdraw $300. Later that morning is when her coworkers realize she's missing. On June 20th, her card is used again to take out $300. And if you're wondering why $300, that's like the max withdrawal they could do.
And this is after she was reported missing.
So 2 of the withdrawals happen before anyone even realizes that she's missing.
And then one after.
Yeah. There is also a potential sighting that day of Joan and R in Grandview, Missouri. Now, 4 days later, on June 24th, Theresa and Christine throw their party and R is in attendance. The next day, June 25th, Joan's car is found at the Trail Ridge Apartments and police have their first encounter with R at the apartment complex, but he gets away. That's also when Frenchie says that he picked R up nearby and brought him to R's apartment in Lenexa. So all of that's on the same day. On June 26th, investigators learned that Theresa left her boyfriend's apartment at 6 a.m. So we now have her sighted at 6 a.m. But by 8 a.m., Christine is calling in sick to work for the both of them. On June 27th, Theresa's card is used to withdraw money, and later that day, R's car is found with Theresa and Christine's bank cards inside. So that's kind of the trajectory.
Wow, he's like moving quickly.
Yes. There's like multiple things happening on these days. So that's why it's like a little hard to keep track of the timeline here, right? Okay, so that brings us to June 28th. They finally find Christine's Dodge Colt. It's parked at a Motel 6 just a few blocks away from her apartment. And so they haul it in for testing and, of course, are hoping to find some evidence inside or some clues that will lead them to these missing women. Instead, it's nearly empty, and one of the only clues was a few hairs. Outside of the vehicle, the only thing was a scratch on the side of the car on the driver's side and some blued paint transfer from something.
Do I need to remember that?
Yes.
Okay, blue paint.
Blue paint. So at this point, their strongest witness or person who can provide them information is still Frenchie, and he's still talking. In one interview, he handed them some women's sunglasses, and they're like, "Where did you get this?" And he says he found them at the storage unit. So at this point, the police are unaware that R had storage units, one of which was in Stanley, and Frenchie claims that he found them in there the week before inside the storage unit on some rags inside a 5-gallon bucket. And for police who are still frantically searching for all 3 women, this seemed to open up the possibility that one or more of the women could have been inside the storage unit. But there's no other evidence to indicate that they had been there in Stanley.
Do you find that Frenchie's just like bumbling through life, like giving clues for his friend?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like not a good guy to be friends with if you're into something like this guy is, like R is.
Right. And like at one point much later, he says, "Oh, I was at this other storage unit and found some duct tape on the floor." And they're like, "What did you do with the duct tape?" And he's like, "I thought it looked weird and I wanted to maybe, protect my friend. So I threw it on top of the storage unit roof." And Frenchie. So they go up there and they find it, and it does have some long hairs in it, which indicates that, one of the women was likely tied up with duct tape. Yeah. So Frenchie's just
he's a mess.
Doing his thing.
Yeah.
Then this takes us to July 1st. A teenager is riding his bicycle, and he spots what looked to be some clothing in a ditch. And now, Vanessa, I've said before, there are the people who will go and look, and there are the people who don't. Mm-hmm. And I fall into the people who don't category.
I would look.
Well, thankfully for you, like, there's people like you and there's people like this guy who will go and look. And he checks it out and he sees not just clothes, he sees a t-shirt, but also other effects like receipts and papers and like a check ledger and a glasses case. And so later that day, he says, I'm gonna go like do my thing, and if it's still there when I come back, I'll like bring some home with me. So he kind of gathers some of these items and he brings them home to his parents, and they encourage him to go check it out again. But he's a teenager and he got distracted. And so he doesn't, but later in that week, he does hear a news report and connects the name that they say in the news report to the stuff he found. And that's Christine Rusch's name. And it's just there in the ditch.
Just there. And did anyone ever end up recovering that, like the police?
Yeah. So at this point, you know, they go out, they collect it. So they've got this in evidence. The only thing missing is the kid said he had seen a white t-shirt with like a yellow stain on it. But when they went back to kind of collect all this evidence, that wasn't there. We'll be back in a moment. So at this point, the search for Art is extensive. Obviously, police are still looking for Joan, Christine, and Theresa, but like many of the stories where there's a serial offender like this, his story really overshadows theirs, and it's harder and harder to see what's happening with these women and the search for them. We know at this point their families are consulting psychics, waterways are being searched, dogs are brought out, but there's like no trace of the women. If you want like a really fuller breakdown of how they catch R, I do recommend the book Suddenly Gone, which I referenced in our first episode. But essentially what ends up happening is the FBI learns that he's hiding in Texas. And they basically trick him by getting one of his female contacts to talk with him. And she says she's going to fly out to meet him in Dallas. And so he's been tricked into going into the airport, and he's promptly arrested there on July 7th. There's no incident. Everything goes kind of smoothly, but they take him in. Now, R's first round of questioning, it lasts 8 hours. At this point, there's several weeks into the disappearances of these women, and it's clear to me that law enforcement officers did not believe that the women were alive. And so they began their questioning, and you can tell that they don't believe it because they began their questioning with like questions about auto thefts, kind of like ease him into it. And then they start asking him about Terri. By the time they brought him in for questioning, officers were able to confirm that he was in Wichita the night of Terri's murder. They had learned that Terri had met R the month before the murder, and on the day of the murder, he had told a friend he was going to Wichita to see her. His contact information was found inside her townhouse, and the next day he rented some paint equipment in Wichita under one of his aliases and never returned them, so that confirms that he was in Wichita around that date. He, when he's presented with these questions, denies killing her, and then, so they start showing him photos of the crime scene to kind of unsettle him.
Was he unsettled?
In some ways, but he like kind of refuses to look at the photos. He says he didn't do it. So, you know, things are getting kind of tense. So they basically call a break, and they take a break and they return and they start asking R about Joan. He denies even knowing her when they pressed him. And so finally he said he didn't know her. He doesn't know where she lived, that he had never been in her apartment. There's one problem though. The investigators had not mentioned that Joan lived in her apartment. This had been on the news, but this kind of was enough for investigators to feel certain he had kind of slipped up and stumbled here.
So he said he didn't know about her apartment,
yeah.
But he knew about her apartment?
Yeah, so basically he says, I've never been in her apartment. And they're like, we never said she lived in an apartment. Haha.
She could have lived anywhere.
Right.
Right.
Although,
okay.
So they're like, we caught him, he stumbled, but honestly, it had been reported in the news.
Right.
So if anyone watching the news would have known she lived in an apartment, but I mean, I think that they were just looking for any like little.
And also, it's not unnatural to assume that somebody in their early 20s lives in an apartment.
Right. But for them, this was like
a mistake.
A mistake, and we're getting him, right?
Okay.
So then they finally start asking him about the Corsica, because there's no denying that he knows about the Corsica because he was seen.
Right. He had it. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is where he throws Frenchie under the bus, so to speak. He claims that it was Frenchie that had given him the vehicle. He also claimed that Frenchie was with him when the ATM card was used and Joan's card was used, and that the two of them had a system for figuring out the PIN numbers. So he's just trying to play like this is just mere coincidence. He just happened to have her card. They kind of do this thing where they hack bank cards. It's not very believable, but that's what he was going with. And then he kind of starts to tense up again when they show him pictures of Christine. And he says he does recognize her from Trafalgar Square, and he admits to them that he thought she was cute, but he really downplayed the interactions that he had with her. And then he says he wasn't at the party.
Had other people seen him at the party?
Yeah, so it's like he was at the party. And again, he brings up Frenchie when they ask him about the bank cards found in his car. And he says, oh, I'd witnessed Frenchie heading into their apartment.
I really don't want to feel any sympathy for Frenchie, but he just seems like a bumbling idiot. And now this guy's just like using him as his like blaming thing.
Yeah. Now, this questioning, it goes on for a while. Mostly he's avoiding the questions, he's blaming Frenchie, but eventually one of the officers says very matter-of-factly that they knew the women were dead. And finally, R said, well, they're probably dead now.
What does that mean?
Okay, so knowing you, Vanessa, I know what you're hoping. It's also probably what the investigator's hoping, which is this is kind of a vague statement, and maybe it means that somewhere these women are, there's like the possibility that they're alive. And so they start pushing him more and more for clarity on this. Like, are they alive? Like, could something work out?
I'm just like, this guy has killed people before. It seems weird that he would have left them not dead.
Yeah, but he has really these weird, like storage units, and this was like
that's really, really scary.
Right. So he had these lingering questions about the storage units. So they're pushing him, and eventually he finally does say, you'll dig them up someday.
Meaning he killed and buried them. Possibly?
Possibly, right. So later, under more questionings and threats of the death penalty, R says, nothing happened in Missouri, where there was the death penalty, only Kansas, which didn't have it at the time. So he had thought out enough about the punishment portion of his crimes to like kind of make that clear to them. After his arrest, officers don't stop trying to figure out what happened to the women. I believe at this point they did not feel the women survived their encounter with R, particularly after what happened to Hazel and Terri.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. One of the items found by the side of the road was Christine's checkbook ledger. Now, for our younger audience members, back in the day, when you wrote checks to pay for things, you would keep a running total of your bank balance in your ledger. So you would subtract each check as you wrote it down.
By hand.
Yes. In order to know how much money was left in your account. My mom still does this.
Does she?
Yeah. I tried to get her to do online banking, and she's like, never. Now, like my mom, Christine was super diligent about keeping this updated, but there were 4 checks missing from her checkbook with no corresponding entry in the ledger. Following up on Christine's account, they realized that on June 26th, these checks had been used to wipe out her account at 4 different banks in Overland Park. These checks did have her signature, which matched her real signature, which means in those morning hours before anyone even realized that she was missing, those transactions were occurring. Now, the evening of the 26th, there's record of Theresa Brown's card being used at some ATMs further out, and security footage from those ATMs were reviewed. In them, you can see Christine in the videos at around 10 p.m. She's wearing sunglasses, her hair's disheveled, and it looks like she has a bruise or abrasion on her face that's kind of covered with a bandage. And those are the last images of Christine.
And she was the last that they heard speak too, right? Like, yeah. Theresa seemed to have gone, like, missing somehow before Christine did.
So you have Theresa. What they know is that she left her boyfriend's house kind of in the early morning hours of that Monday. And then, you know, within hours, Christine's calling and sick.
Yeah, we're only hearing from Christine then from that point on. One of the things I find unusual, so like, is this guy just basically killing and kidnapping people purely for money?
Yeah, so this is heavily financially motivated.
Do we need to like really kill somebody to rob their bank account?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Doesn't it just seem like such a strange thing? Like, I feel like the last, I don't know how many, like a lot of this has been motivated by like rape or other things, and this is not.
Right.
This is money.
Yes. So a lot of this is financially motivated. Like a lot of his crimes in between the murder of Hazel up to the other murders and disappearances, all of those are like heavily financially connected, right? Even like the Hazel thing, like he's like stealing some stuff from her place. There's a lot going on with this guy. Again, like we would have to get into the psychology of it, but like from what I know, sexual motivation is not necessarily part of his MO overall.
And since Christine was the last one to be seen at the ATM, and we did talk about like that weirdness with the phone calls, does it feel like he made Christine make those phone calls after something might have already happened to Theresa?
So we have like a hiccup in the belief that Teresa's already gone at this point scenario, but yeah, I do think that you're right. Like he is making Christine do these things and like call in, right? Because it's out of character for her to have called. And she calls Teresa's work first and her work second.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now it's not necessarily difficult for them to build a case against R. He's charged with 3 counts of murder in the deaths of Joan, Theresa, and Christine. He's also charged with robbery, fraud, theft, and kidnapping. What they had connecting him was eyewitnesses, blood evidence, hair evidence, the presence of personal belongings, the keys, the cars. Like, it's really a lot of evidence. What was more difficult, though, is that this is a case for 3 women, and it had to move forward without the presence of their bodies because at this point, they still haven't found any of those women. Now, we talked about other women who were missing, and there wasn't a body, and that was what made prosecutors reluctant to move forward with murder charges, but that wasn't true here. I think the scope of it, the fact that there were 3 women who were abducted, was enough for them to make an attempt. In addition, there were so many eyes on this case as more and more women, they started to realize that R had been likely in their apartments when they weren't there. And this was linked to him by the presence of their belongings in his stuff. Or in one case, the assault of another woman on June 12th in her apartment. This would have happened between Terri's murder and Joan's disappearance. In this crime, the perpetrator used an air gun like the one R had in his car.
Okay, to be clear though, you said he assaulted a woman in her apartment. Not sexual assault still.
No, so like she was in bed and she was even sleeping naked in bed, and he like was trying to make her put clothes on.
Okay, so he's definitely not a rapey guy. He's money for everything and violence.
Yes.
He just likes to be super violent.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now plenty of cases have been tried before without bodies. Actually, most of them have been tried in the last 20 years, but this was still relatively untested in Kansas. There had been 3 cases without a body tried before in the state, and those were considered successful because they had led to convictions. The hurdle with this one is that they included all 3 women in one case, which meant they had to prove all 3 murders happened without their bodies. So as they're preparing for this case, R, who had been held in prison at the time, called one of the detectives on the case, and he asked him to come to the prison because he had something to tell him. And so when Sergeant Hinkle arrived, R basically tries to negotiate with him. He said he would give Hinkle information about where the women were if he wouldn't have to serve life in prison. And he seems to think like 15 to 20 years-ish might be enough.
Well, I mean, he only got 3 for Hazel, so...
Right. So Hinkle declines. The most R would then say was that they could be found in a rural area. Now, later, a jailhouse informant would come forward, and he said that R had told him plenty of things, but one of them was that he had killed Terri and the other women as well. And he said that R claimed to have killed other women before, which actually is an ongoing assumption with R given his history. So not just these women, but other women. This all seemed to match up, and then the informant hit them with some gruesome information. He said that R had told him that he had used a wood chipper to dispose of their bodies in the area near the Blue River.
What are the odds if somebody did do something like that of being able to recover what's left of the bodies?
Yeah, so investigators start to try to like analyze this. I mean, it's not the first time the idea of a wood chipper
Right,
has
I know
been.
that's like a movie thing. Is
Right.
it a real life thing too?
So, according to what I've read, it is yes possible, but would take a few extra circumstances to make it possible.
Right, because wood is a different density than bone.
Right. So in testing, my understanding is that the body would have to have been frozen before the wood chipper. Anyway, so
I feel like you just gave like a crash course on that. Okay. Anyway, so it's not possible unless you go to some extreme lengths to make it possible.
yeah, so my understanding as I was reading on this case was they determined that it was unlikely.
Okay.
You know, they did find he did have a connection to a man who owned a wood chipper. There was some blood in a wood chipper. It actually ended up being animal blood, not human blood. It's kind of a long digression, but what they do think is more likely is that he could have actually placed Christine and Theresa in the Blue River, which is where the informant had said this wood chipper thing happened.
So was he just basically adding the wood chipper part for like good prison story?
Maybe. Right. Police do actually end up searching the river, though, and they're unsuccessful in locating any of the women.
Okay.
Now, eventually, just days before the trial, investigators got a tip about one piece of evidence, and that's that streak of blue paint on Christine's driver's side door.
Mm-hmm.
And this led them to another storage facility where a rental contract was taken out in Christine's name.
Before or after she was missing?
June 26th. So the day everyone realizes, like, that's the day they call it.
Okay.
Now, to enter this storage area, drivers need to actually pull up to a keypad to enter their information. And according to the owner, drivers often come way too close to the posts when they're doing so, and they end up scraping their cars on the blue paint there. So that explains the blue paint transfer. So they are asking the owners about this, and they identify R as the man they saw at the storage facility. In looking at pictures of Christine and Theresa, though, they're a little bit more unsure, but they identify Theresa, even though it's Christine's name that the account is in. So Christine actually is the one who opens the storage facility account that day. But they indicate that the woman that they saw was Theresa.
It gets very confusing with the Theresa Christine thing because, like, we have Christine calling for Theresa.
Yeah.
Now we're having Christine's name being used, but it was Theresa's face.
Yeah.
Like, this is very confusing.
Yeah, so it's really unclear what's happening there, but investigators surmise that R might have made Theresa sign Christine's name on June 26th, which is, again, that day that Christine had called in sick to their workplaces. Now, all of this added up to something that they thought for a while, which is the possibility that for a while at least, R kept one or both of the roommates alive, likely holding them in one or more of his rented storage facilities. Now, this trial for this case was pretty intense, and there was a massive witness list and pieces of evidence to go through. Really working through the conviction would be like its own separate episode, and I want to make sure we focus more on the women than on R. But his trial began on October 19th, 1990, and it concluded on November 2nd, 1990. And after deliberation, R was found guilty of 11 felony charges, and for those crimes, he was convicted and given several life sentences.
So finally, some appropriate punishment.
Well, yeah. So, like, you know, this is definitely the case of someone who has such a history of violence, and like, as you know, like, I'm more in the direction of I don't think prison works as a system of justice. But I've never quite been able to wrap my head around, like, what do we do with instances of things like this guy?
Right. Yeah. Right. And I kind of think the longer we just keep them somewhere, the less time they're out in public. I know it's not good for them. It's not going to rehabilitate anyone or solve any long-term problems, but it'll
I mean, like,
keep people safe in the meantime.
I think with someone like him, like, what is the notion of rehabilitation and would it work for him? And I think that's like a whole, different like thought process. But like, I can't see a way in which this particular person could ever be a safe person.
I feel like that's the truth of everybody we talk about.
Yeah. He's definitely not. Now, the search for Joan and Christine and Theresa, this continues long after R's conviction. They've used psychics, they've followed tips, they've tried out new technologies, and every time remains are found in this area, I'm sure the first thought is of these women. Now, in fact, Vanessa, I'm going to make the connection here because you're going to know it, but our listeners won't, which is I started following this story after we recorded an episode on Donna Nelton, whose remains were found in Missouri. And in that episode, I asked our listeners if they would like us to cover this story and to chime in if they did. But due to a hiccup in our scheduling, we are actually airing this episode before that one. So I just took it upon myself to dig in because I wanted to learn more. Now, the connection here, because our listeners haven't heard this yet, but the connection between these two things is that Donna Nelton had been murdered and her remains were found in rural Missouri. But for many years, she was only known as Bone Woman before her identification in 2022. And it's a really interesting episode about that identification process. But one of the initial thoughts when they found her remains were that these were Joan's remains. But upon analysis, they weren't a match for her. Now, in terms of looking for the women, still, one of the primary search sites has always been a field owned by the Army Corps of Engineers in Douglas County, Kansas. In the earlier days of the investigation, a witness says that she saw a car pull up to this field and that matched the description of R's Toyota. In addition, another jailhouse informant said that once, while they were watching television in prison, he was next to R, and that they were watching Sergeant Pat Hinkle give an interview from this field, and R remarked that Hinkle was practically standing on one of the bodies. Now, in 1999, this field was searched extensively over the course of 4 days, and they were using essentially what sounds like archaeological and geological techniques to survey this 200 acres. But despite this work, the search was unsuccessful.
Yeah, I don't believe anything that R says in prison right now. I think he's just saying things to sound cool.
Right. So, which is, there's just ongoing frustrations with him because through the years, as they've continued to talk to him, there's this idea that he's kind of withholding information about where they are, but mostly because he's looking for something in exchange. And so Sergeant Hinkle said in 1999, "I don't feel the need to play any games with him. The feeling has been that R always wants something in return for his statement. I hope he likes his cell he's in because he's going to die there. We don't owe him a thing. My challenge is for him to stand up and take responsibility for what he's done and tell us where the bodies are."
Do you think there's a chance they will ever find the bodies?
Yeah, I think I always hold out hope. And I hope as he continues his life in prison, he's in his 60s now, that at some point he says something, right? I don't know if he's the kind of person kind of capable of empathy based on his history and who he is as a person, but yeah, maybe just one last media hit, right? Maybe that's something he's interested in, is media attention at this point. I don't know. Yeah. But when we began these 2 episodes, we started with a story of Terri Maness's murder, and you'll note that she was not included in his trial. There has never been another suspect in her murder besides R, but the district attorney has never brought charges against him, so this case is considered, in the words of one detective, dead in the water. The ongoing argument is that with those life sentences that he has, it doesn't make sense for them to move forward in Terri's case. That basically it's not financially,
So we know who did it, but we can't say who did it, basically. We can't punish
so at
the
this
person.
point, technically he's her alleged killer because he's never been convicted of it. So this has always left her family in limbo because it makes them feel like Terri has been forgotten. And so I really want to end this with Terri's father's words on this. And he said, "Our turn never came. It's as if he's pulled off the perfect crime."
We are now going to listen to Amy's poem, The Fates, read by Jackie Lee McLean. Jackie is a visual and musical artist based in New York State. She has previously released 3 albums with her band Roan Yellowthorn and is currently working on the release of her first self-titled album, All Mine Now. Jackie is also the feature of an upcoming documentary of the same name about her life and journey as a musician.
The Fates. Joan Butler, 24. Missing since June 18, 1989, from Overland Park, Kansas. Theresa Brown, 22. Missing since June 26, 1989, from Lenexa, Kansas. Christine Rusch, 22. Missing since June 26, 1989, from Lenexa, Kansas. It's this dark riddle again. Memories spun together until violence ignites those bruised dark ghost dreams. Watch for those mournful women roaming through the vast afterlife, their stories glittering on their pomegranate lips. Can you see them flickering at the edge of your vision, the violet rattle of their hearts, so faint they sound like birds caught up in sunflower stalks? We keep looking for taillights weaving through the night as though we could crawl across the distance to see the stranger there, his hands on the wheel as the car idles alongside a meadow. Spin it over again, women holding their bodices closed and the vulgar crack of a gun until the scissors snip those final threads. There is no end when we've been decades here. The corn silk still braiding and unbraiding in the Kansas wind.
For more information about our show or to check out other shows on the network, please visit evergreenpodcast.com. Bye, Vanessa.
Bye, Amy.